Welcome to Better Bedtime Chronicles. You're listening to Nicole
and Bridget. Together we have 15 years experience working directly with families struggling with sleep challenges.
We share stories, advice, and deep dives into all things sleep. Let's go. All right. How's it going?
It's very good. How are you?
I'm well. Yeah. Happy to be here.
Yes. Are we really, though? We were just talking about how our offspring are all just like done with things right now and just tired and at their wits' end.
For reference, we're recording this like a week before Christmas.
Yes.
And the kids are still in school, but they're going to be out of school soon.
Yes.
One more week.
Yeah.
And everyone's, I think, ready for the break. And also, you know, the disruption in their schedules is maybe starting to impact them a little bit.
Parties, there's been extra stuff.
Lots of things going on.
Yeah, so much stuff going on. So, yeah, we're good, but mentally tapped maybe.
Yeah, ready for the break to come.
Yes.
I'm sure our listeners feel that way too.
Yeah, I would say
parents.
So. Yeah, of course you guys are. And we're talking today about can be a tricky age. So 9 months all the way up into, let's say, 15, 16, 17 months, that kind of realm of eventually adjusting down to one nap. But a lot can happen in that time with sleep and just with life. Certainly where we are, a lot of folks return to work at 12 months. So there's that transition we'll talk about as well.
Yep.
But if you have a 9-month-old as a roommate or a little in that age range, you might also be feeling pretty tapped out because maybe your baby's a little more clingy right now or their sleep is changing. Maybe you've heard of the 9-month sleep regression, which again is a word we don't love a ton because it's usually a healthy sign of development. We just take a bit of a step back with sleep sometimes. Yeah,
so let's start there. Let's talk about what's happening at 9 months for babes that impacts their sleep.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely they've reached this point where they know they're separate from their parent, right? I think that starts to come a little earlier, but it really hits home. It seems to be at this time. And you might notice your otherwise content baby won't let you leave the room now, or they're having a preference for you versus another parent, or someone they're usually pretty content with, or just a little more clingy, people would describe. And so if you were sleeping well before that and now they're starting to really hold on tight to you, kind of grasping at you as you try to put them down, it can feel alarming. Something's wrong or something happened, but it's usually pretty common. And then the other side of it is if your little ones have never really slept well or it's always been a bit hairy with sleep and then this happens, it can be this added layer on top of it. So we get a lot of inquiries at this age as well because of this very thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's helpful to know that that's normal. It's a really important developmental milestone that, you know, children understand that their parents are separate from themselves and that they, you know, have the capacity to take space, and that becomes really scary. So really the goal of this stage is just to help our kids understand, like, we're here. We hear your fears. We're, you know, emotionally available to you, lots of cuddles, lots of support.
And reassuring them of your presence too, right? Being there, make sure they know you're there, you're offering comfort, offering support. And that can be tricky to do while still maintaining the sleep boundary that you have and having their own sleep space, let's say, or you have a routine. So it can be hard to maintain that when they're being clingy at you.
I have often encouraged families to really focus on awake time during this stage, right? Awake time is when you can do lots of connection, lots of co-regulation, lots of things that feel really nice for you and babe.
That way, when it comes down to bedtime or it's nap time and you've had all that time together and you fill that bucket for connection, it's a little bit hopefully more helpful to be able to put them down like usual and go through your normal process. It can be so tempting to rock the boat, right, and make changes too soon. But just like we mentioned in our last episode, if you listened about that 6 to 8 month range, it can be tempting to rock the boat when you see a change for a day or two, but really try to give it a good stretch of time before you make any changes.
And this is also a really key time to maintain consistency. I hear from a lot of families, they'll call and say, you know, like this, like they call it, what do they call it? Separation anxiety has started. Parents love that term. Separation anxiety has started, so we started, you know, doing extra rocking, extra cuddling. They'd like kind of change up their strategy. Things were going really well, and all of a sudden they've, you know, like slided into something that they don't want to be doing as far as sleep goes. And I often remind families, like, consistency is actually really key for security. And children thrive on consistent routine and consistent responses. And so if we want to make our children feel secure in these moments when they are feeling insecure, our best response is to consistency and routine. And deviating actually sometimes causes distress. And that's how you get those situations where your baby who used to go down super easy all of a sudden has all of these needs and demands that are very different, and they feel unmeetable, right? These parents will call me and say, it was no big deal at first. We both loved the extra this or that, but now all of a sudden I can't solve this problem for this baby, and they won't stop, right? And that's the inconsistency. That's the uncertainty that child feels when their routine is disrupted and when they don't know what to expect from their parent. So just a reminder, yeah, consistency is stability for children. It's security for children. So when they're feeling insecure, just keep up with that routine and that consistency.
Yeah, they know what to expect. It's such a comfort to them. I'm glad you mentioned that, because in the moment, it can feel the opposite.
Yes.
It can feel like, well, they need me and I'm not doing this thing, or I'm not rocking for an extra 10 minutes or half an hour or whatever. And it feels like, well, I'm being mean or I'm not responding to them. But in fact, and what you're saying is, you are responding on a much bigger level by providing this like comfortable, consistent, predictable sleep routine for them.
Yeah. And if you communicate to them security and like, everything is okay, they are safe, it's okay that we have this separation that we're about to, because that is what sleep is. Sleep is separation, right? And even if it's just mental separation, if you're co-sleeping, they're still separating from you and your presence. And so if we communicate this separation is healthy, the separation is safe, we are all safe, this is secure, that's a really important message to share with our children. And if we're panicking about their panic, we're just communicating to them that there's something to be scared of or something to be worried about. And there's not, right? And then the messaging needs to be, I've got this. I'm the parent and I can communicate security to you.
Oh, I love that, because we really get ourselves cranked up, right? Wound up. Some partners feed off each other. I certainly know that was me and my hubby early on with our first. And then we all become panicked, and then the baby picks up on that.
Totally.
So really, especially if you tell it yourself in your heart, which is true, Nicole just said, is this is the best thing to do for them. This is the best way to care for them and show up for them, is to have this consistent sleep hygiene, the sleep boundaries that you have, and follow through with it. And then in the moment, if they aren't loving that, so crying, upset, they're clearly not like vibing with it initially, you maintaining your calm and comfort about it, even if you have to kind of fake it at first, because no one likes to hear their baby cry, but we know that's part of being a human. It's just what goes on, and you're there and you're responsive on some level, but just trying to keep your composure. And if you need to tag out for a few minutes to get calm or tag someone else in, like, don't be afraid of doing that, because we want the adult in the room to be, or the person going in and checking on them, to be calm and content.
Yeah. As I say this all the time, but our mental health is really directly impacting our children's mental health, right? So it's important to care for ourselves so we can care for them.
Absolutely. And I just love the way you said it. I think it's so important to just know that this is the right thing to do, even if in the moment it feels like painful or hard. Yeah.
So that's the 9-month sleep regression in a nutshell. At 9 months, why don't we talk about what's normal for sleep? What are we usually seeing most babies at 9 months?
Mostly 2 solid naps, somewhere around 9:30, depending on how this family dynamic is and what their structure looks like. But somewhere in that realm, and then again around 1:32, we're hoping for 1.5 to 2 hours per nap. There's one baby I know his house layout perfectly, being at this house from like 8 years ago. Is a baby who only ever slept 40 minutes for both naps. He'd be low sleep needs, I'd call it.
Yep.
There will be listeners on here who have a baby who has lower sleep needs. He was a 10-hour at night, 2 40-minute naps at 9 months. That's on the low end.
Yeah.
But
low average, though. Like, he was probably well rested and fine.
He was totally well rested. Yeah. And he went from actually sleeping in the car half the night. So they were driving many times at night to get him to sleep, bouncing him. So the fact that he'd sleep 10 hours and have the 2 naps, they were ecstatic. I was like, oh, what's wrong? Something's not adding up. And it was my first year, maybe my second year of sleep consulting. So I wasn't as sure of what fits outside of the box, right? That we're initially like taught, which is kind of silliness now that looking back. But most I think would though have 2 solid naps, sleep going to bed somewhere between 6:30 and 7 at the latest, I suspect, depending on when that last nap ended, and then sleeping through. I definitely still get clients who want to hold on to one night feed at that age, which we always support it so long as everyone's getting good rest. But I will say this, if we see a 9-month-old who is sleeping not very well and has one feeding on the table and they don't seem to be able to differentiate like awake for a feed versus not, and they're a well-fed baby, their weight curve is being followed, that I would gently encourage to likely let go of that feed if it's hindering the other wakings. But more often than not, it's just they sleep well, they wake up probably around 2 or 3, they have a feed and back to bed for the rest of the night, which is miles ahead of where they would have been initially.
Yeah, as a parent, I love this stage. I find it really like refreshing. The kids are sleeping quite a lot during the day, so it does feel like I can get some stuff done. Now, of course, this is for kids who aren't, napping, co-sleeping, that kind of thing, because then you're there. But for me, my kiddos by that stage were not. And so, yeah. And then you've got the nice chunk in the middle of the day, like 3 to 4 hours where they're awake and you can go do activities and you can play and you can go grocery shopping. And it doesn't feel like you're just like rushing from one nap to the next.
Yeah, it's kind of liberating. It's more enjoyable time with them. And then having the ability to sleep more soundly is just really nice too.
It's great. Yeah.
It is nice. I mean, just if you're listening to this too, and you've come across this and you aren't like well-versed on what we get up to, like we really do encourage having good sleep structure and encouraging little ones to fall asleep on their own so they'll sleep more soundly. So that's when we talk about this freeing feeling. It's knowing that you've gone through that. But even if you do co-sleep or you baby wear for naps, even just having those pockets spread out nicely can be really helpful so that their wake windows are just that. They're awake,
you get
they're
those
ready.
Nice long wake windows.
Yeah,
it's the best. I remember feeling afraid of those long wake windows when I was a first-time parent. I don't know if you ever felt that way, especially the transition to 1. Oh my gosh. Like I remember being like, what the hell am I going to do for 6 straight hours with this kid? Honestly, it was terrifying.
It is terrifying. I see TikToks now about like, how am I going to entertain this baby for all these, hours during the wake window? Yeah. It's true. That is every, I feel like challenge or like new phase brings its share of issues. And it's like, oh my God, right? What are we going to do? But
it's funny now though, because with my third, like I was so eager to get him to that 1 nap schedule because it would work so much better for the rest of the family, right? Like my kids were just like constantly, they were nap trapped. They wanted to be out and about and they couldn't because Babe had to nap. So it's funny how your perspective shifts, right, over time, and then you're in hindsight you can fill those hours, but I understand if that's where you're at right now and you're like, I can't do this, what are you talking about? I felt that too.
It's hard to how do you entertain a baby, right? Like there's always so many things you can do, but I feel many of us, especially as first-time parents, overdid it too much. We put too much pressure. They don't care. They don't really care, right? They're not really worried about it too much. So
they're all doing great.
They're fine. I like everything. We put so much pressure on ourselves, but next we sometimes see, well, depending on your home and what your dynamic is, but the return to work coming soon after. And so having this adjusting to daycare, and then there's the whole daycare might want less naps than what you're having at home. And then maybe you're having a lot of feelings about returning to work. When I was returning with my oldest son, I had a job at the Ministry of Agriculture in Guelph, which I loved. It was a great job. I left it to start this business because I was being called, I guess, somewhere else you could say. But I remember like adjusting him to daycare. He did like his 1-hour visit. I went to Winners to try on clothes and just like cried in the waiting or the change room, right? Like, oh, I can't believe this year is over. It's just
hard.
Unreal how fast it goes by. But then that adjustment too, that transition can lead to some sleep challenges. It can be tempting to rock your boat. And if you're listening to this and you're someone who co-sleeps or bed shares or rocks your baby to sleep and you're feeling pressured to do sleep training or make changes for the sake of daycare, we're here to say like, you don't need to do that.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great message actually. Kids are really good at understanding the difference between caregivers. So if you're, say you still nurse your baby to sleep at, that age, keep doing it if that's working for you, because this is what's going to happen. They'll go to daycare. Yeah, daycare is not nursing to sleep. That's fine. Daycare has their own strategies and they're experts. Like they've done this transition hundreds of times. They know what they're doing and they'll find a different strategy that works well for your kiddo. And if you don't have a daycare that's on board with that, then find a new
red
daycare.
Flag. Yeah. That's a red flag for sure.
Because they'll do it. They will. They'll find a good strategy and they'll make it work. And your baby will understand the difference between nursing to sleep at home with you and daycare and their strategies.
Yeah, that's true. And that's can feel, especially we get a lot of calls too. I'll get like, it's 2 weeks till I'm returning to work. Yes. Can you help me? I feel like I have to do this because of daycare. And it's like, well, no, you still do what feels good for you at home and that's working well for you. If it's not working well, that's another conversation.
Yeah.
But if what's working well for you at home is great, but at daycare, it's going to be different. I think your baby will surprise you.
Yeah.
They're so
They always
resilient.
do.
Yeah. I will say one thing though. If you are going to a daycare that insists on your baby adjusting to one nap because they're 12 months or they're about to be 12 months.
And this is so common, by the way. Like parents
Absolutely.
often freak out about this because daycare providers will tell them like, no, I need one nap.
Mhm.
That's a really common thing for a daycare provider to say.
Yeah. They count on that ratio, I think, for like taking lunch, and it's just the way the flow goes, especially at a center. So if it's a home daycare or it's someone who is more flexible, I usually start by trying to advocate and say, like, please offer 2 pockets, even if one's in the stroller while we're at the park and then one's, you know, in the nap room. But if they won't and they must go down to one nap, and again, we can't control what happens in other people's spaces, and they offer that one nap a day, you would just be aware of that. And maybe your bedtime's coming earlier that night to compensate less daytime sleep. The other thing too is, and this is just in mind with any of our nap transition ages, is you might find they need 2 naps on the weekend or the days that you have off. My oldest was like that forever. He would still nap twice a day on the weekends for like months after starting daycare at 1 year old. That's okay to do too.
But they do tend to handle it okay. Like I mean, generally I would say you'll see kind of a more tired kid for a month or two as they transition, but it's surprising how well they actually do on a single nap because they're really entertained by their peers, right? Like they're spending that day having fun, doing fun things. Even if your daycare provider, one of my daycare providers for one of my kids did this, they allowed me to keep my 2 nap schedule that was working really nicely. But my daughter, she didn't want a 2 nap schedule. She was so happy to play with all these kids. So she was like, I'm not going to sleep at 9 o'clock. Like, this is the best time here. So instead, she fought that nap as soon as she started at daycare, and very soon she was on one nap. And it was just because she had FOMO. She didn't want to miss out.
She was ready. And I like that too, which again brings up this, like, it depends on the baby, their temperament and what's going on around them, what the settings like, and to just be flexible with that and easy on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for a lot of families, they'll hold on to 2 naps for quite some time. It's a massive ballpark. I usually would see children transition down to 1 nap anywhere between 12 and all the way up to 17 months. So quite a gap.
It's quite a range. Let's talk about what kind of signs. Say you didn't have daycare pressuring you into a certain schedule and you could kind of just go by, go with the flow. What would you see? What would be a good sign that it's time to start moving towards 1 nap?
Yeah. So if you listen to our last episode, you would know that they often still happily go down for the morning nap. So we wouldn't look for that necessarily, although that would be an indicator too if they were really trying to stay awake for that morning nap. But what we would look for is resisting sleep otherwise. So going down for either another nap or bedtime in the evening, and they're either crying or they're just wide awake. So I would be like wide awake more than 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes or longer. So not falling asleep initially. The other, and this is especially true for 9, 10, 11 month realm, is the 2 a.m. party is what clients say. So they're awake in the middle of the night for like 1 to 2 hours. Usually it's like 2 hours, and because their sleep pressure's off. They're having too many pockets of sleep during the day. They're not tired enough to have a good length of nighttime sleep. So that's what I would definitely look for. But like always, we say we want to see this a few nights a week. So let's say 4 days or nights a week for a good week or two. And when you see that, it's a good time to go, because teething, learning a new skill, maybe that separation anxiety could be impacting sleep in the way we just described, but we don't want to jump too soon. We wait, and when we know, we dive in. Yeah,
we're looking for those consistent patterns over time. And then when you do see those consistent patterns, and if you do have the luxury of kind of moving at your own pace in your own home, this tends to be a tricky one because kids love that 9:30 nap, right? And so even a child who is, say, skipping their second nap every day, but is napping at 9 a.m. really well for a couple hours, we need to push that nap later because they ultimately will have too long of a gap before bed, and then it causes night disruption. So we're really looking at moving that first nap of the day later in the day and eliminating the second nap. And that's kind of the strategy. So how do we do that?
Exactly what you just said. So we're going to say it's only going to be 1 nap. So at this point, we know our baby, let's say, happily goes down at 9:30, they sleep, and then they will not sleep again for the rest of the day, or they'll have like a tiny, terrible, crappy nap later. Yeah. So instead, we're going to say in the morning, maybe we see that yawn at 9 or 9:15, they're rubbing their eyes. We're pushing them as far as we can, more than 15 minutes if we can. We're going to be doing outside time, protein-rich food, change of activities, doing anything you possibly can to stretch that wake window. It might only be till 10, right? Maybe we get a 10 o'clock nap that day, or 10:30, let's say, and they only sleep for one pocket, and then that's our nap. And if you find yourself with awkward timing again, and you have this massive afternoon block, sometimes a cat nap, an on-the-go nap can be a bit of a saving grace to tie you over to bedtime if you're desperate.
And while you're transitioning.
While you're in this period of transition, absolutely. But otherwise, we would just really encourage you to wait as long as you can, push that morning time. And remember, though, they will likely really want to go down at 9. So you're knowing this, setting your expectations there, and pushing it as long as you can. Finally, you put them down as you typically do, same way as always, whatever that looks like for you. And then you would, when the nap is underway, you try to make it as long as you can by kind of preserving it if you have to, right? If they wake too early type
It's
thing.
very normal for when you transition to one nap for that nap to be a short nap at first. And that lasts a while, like sometimes up to a month, even longer. And I always say to families, like, stick with it, keep going. It's going to lengthen back out, and it almost always does. But for a while there, it's common for it to be short because it's just like their sleep pressure is off. They have too much cortisol pumping in their bodies. We've pushed them, we've stretched them, and it will be better. There is value in doing this, but it just takes a bit of time.
It does take time. And I think the tricky part is, like, along with this season of sleep changes we're going through, it just coincides other developmental things that can impact sleep, right? I'm standing now. I'm walking around the crib now. My parents at work now away from me more. So I'm going to be a little more, restless, let's say. So, and then different foods, right? Or whatever we're seeing happen will coincide with this. And then that can also impact sleep. But like, as you said, just keeping it, maintaining the comfort, the predictability around it is a huge piece of this puzzle.
Yeah.
So just pushing your wake window as long as you can in the morning, offering that one nap when it's underway, trying to make it as lengthy as you can if that means you're, helping out with it. And then again, if you're left with this awful pocket in the day, so let's say they woke up from that nap at 11:14, let's say. So they went to bed at 10 and now it's 11:14 and they're awake for the day. That might be a day where you're a stroller or a nice walk, or if they're still falling asleep on the breast on occasion, you have a breast snuggle snooze at like 3:34 or whatever it is.
Yeah, just to help them through.
Yeah.
And early bedtimes are so key for every single transition. Whenever you're nap transitioning, offer an early bedtime until you're through the transition. So sometimes that means the kid's going to bed at 6:15 or 6:30 for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's okay because we'll move that bedtime back up once they're solidly into the new schedule. But early bedtimes help prevent additional night waking and early rising.
Yes, they really do. It seems like the opposite, but it is true because an overtired person will have a harder time falling asleep and staying asleep. So it's that fine line. So don't be afraid of the early bedtime.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so then what does it look like when you're actually solidly on a one nap schedule?
That's the best time, I think.
It's so good.
Every age has its like lovely moments, but once they're on one nap, it's usually somewhere around 12. The latest I've seen is like it starts at 1, but I'm a fan of 12, 12:30 in that realm. And you have your lunch, you put your little one down and they sleep. Our goal is usually in the 2-3 hour realm if we can get there. And that's their one solid chunk of sleep they have. And that will be the case for likely years.
Yeah, it's so good.
A good couple years. And in the next episode, we'll talk about that toddler sleep, the sort of 18 months and up and what that will look like. Because sometimes there's,
new challenges.
You'll see new challenges that come our way and different abilities because now they're older. But definitely the one nap schedule is nice. It can be freeing because you have your morning time and your afternoon time. And I feel like the world is friendlier to that. Like a lot of things, the programming and things are kind of set up knowing that there's a nap around
midday.
Yeah, midday nap. So that's what you could expect when the dust has settled and you're gone through the transition is one solid nap a day. And you would likely hang on to that until 2 or 3 or even more.
Yeah, even close to 4. I both my kids stopped napping like pretty close to kindergarten, months away from kindergarten. So
yeah, same. They hold on to it. Although there's some that will be much sooner than that.
For sure.
I would say the absolute youngest I've seen is 2.
2.
Yeah, which is rare.
Yeah.
But
I would still be pushing for that
I'd be advocating for it for sure. So yeah, hopefully that helps you with this period that you're in. And then next we'll get into all things toddler sleep.
Woohoo! Sounds fun.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. Just remember, the shit is hard, but you are killing it.
To stay in touch, you can find us at betterbedtime.ca.